We're talking about finding the door and the way off the wheel. Okay, so you'll remember, hopefully, that we're in a theme which is about the wheel, the spiral, and the goal. And the last few weeks, we've been visiting lots of different realms, different worlds. Last week, we heard from Dharma Mai about the God and human realms. And next week, we're going to have 3 short talks where people will talk about their personal experiences of how they get out of the realms and how the Buddha in each realm gives them a little bit of help to do that. But what we're looking at today is how we find our way to get off the wheel altogether. How do we find the door that gets us out of all this stuff? How do we stop that wheel from spinning round and round? So please, could I have the Wheel of Life image? And there's also this one here, hopefully you can see too. So Vedanya has this great metaphor, this great image, where you could see that being in the different realms on the wheel it's a bit like being in a computer game. And it's like you go around all these different levels, you kind of collect points and stuff like that. But actually, the idea is to get right out of the game, to stop playing the game altogether. To stop, get off this thing that's spinning round and round. And you can become enlightened from most of the realms. Like, for instance, from the hell realm, you could do it. Not so well from the God realm. But the best place to aim for is the human realm, if that's where you want to go, if you want to get off the wheel. And that's because in the human realm, there's some suffering and there's some joy, and hopefully the suffering is not overwhelming, so it allows you to practice. So it's not like the God realm where everything's going your way, so why would you practice? And you might recognize that from times in your life when it's been going well, and actually, there's not the same urgency to meditate, to practice, to come to the Buddhist center perhaps. And then and it's not overwhelming like the hell realm in the human realm. So you could, if you're playing this game, you could decide, right, I'm going to go right into the hell realm and I'll just get enlightened out of there. But I think that's a bit of a risky move. I think if I was like, I was just thinking of this, I used to watch these people playing games really skillfully on, like, I don't know, it's a kind of entertainment. You watch people playing games really well. And if I was one of those people telling you how to play the Wheel of Life, I'd say go for the human realm. Don't take the risk of doing the hell realm or the Hungry Ghost realm. Yeah, so in the human realm, you have choice. You have choice. You have this wonderful human condition that we have, is that we have a consciousness that can look at itself. We can look at our experience and we can learn from it, and we can have awareness of our experience and make choices. So I'm moving that wheel up just for a bit more, because in a way, what is this wheel about? What is this wheel? Well, it comes from the vision of the Buddha. So the Buddha sat down under the Bodhi tree, and what he saw there is he understood conditionality. So he understood how things work. And he tried to express that in a number of different ways, through words, which I'm going to say in a minute, but also through images, and one of those images is the Wheel of Life. So the Wheel of Life is actually an expression of different ways of conditionality. Different ways that conditionality work. So maybe you could, stop that picture now. And I'm just put it out of the way for our. Okay, so there's a phrase that is what the Buddha understood and knew with his very being, more than just understanding it cognitively. It's like he knew it, he really saw it, and it is pratitya samutpada, which is translated sometimes as conditioned co-production or dependent arising. And what that means is that everything that arises is dependent on conditions. And when things are arising and then they're passing away, and when they pass away, that is because the conditions for them to be there have passed away. So that basically reality is a whole flow of arising, passing away, and that is dependent on conditions. Things don't happen just fortuitously. They happen on dependence on conditions. And this is what the Buddha saw, and it's a very fundamental principle of Buddhist thought. And actually, it can seem quite simple. It's kind of like, yeah, well, okay, if A happens, then B happens, you know. But actually, because the conditions are there are so many billions of conditions, it's actually very complicated, and I think beyond what we can understand when we're not enlightened. Because there's a really, it's a little story from the Pali Canon about the Buddha was living in a particular place, and then Ananda, who was his companion for many years, for 25 years, Ananda came up to him, and is the classic way, he said he approached the Blessed One, and on arrival, having bowed down to the Blessed One, sat to one side. As he was sitting there, he said to the Blessed One, "It's amazing, Lord, it's astounding how deep this dependent co-arising is, and how deep its appearance. And yet to me, it seems as clear can be." And the Buddha said, "Don't say that, Ananda. Don't say that." Deep is this dependent co-arising, and deep its appearance. It's because of not understanding and not penetrating this Dhamma that this generation is like a tangled skein, a knotted ball of string, like matted rushes and reeds, and does not go beyond transmigration, beyond the plains of deprivation, woe, and bad destinations. So I think it was quite clear from the Buddha. It was like Ananda wasn't getting it, and we don't get it, and it's because that we don't get how conditioned co-production works that we have suffering. So what we're going to do today is like explore that a little bit, kind of get a taste of it. So conditionality is not all of the same kind, and there are two great orders of conditionality at work in the universe and in human life, which are called cyclical, which is reactive, or spiral, which is progressive. So I'm going to go a lovely drawing now. Yes, we've got some really great artists in the Sangha. And maybe I should have asked them to draw the picture. So we've got the wheel of life, okay, which is the going round, the cyclical one. And then we've got the spiral, which comes off of that, which is the other order of conditionality. So you could say that the cyclic mode, so this is going round, this wheel of life, just going round and round it, is, it's actually samsaric. This is where we're creating samsara, because we're just moving all the time between pain and pleasure. Whereas the spiral is we're moving towards the nirvana. So in the going round and round, there's a process of action and reaction between these different pairs of factors. So for instance, we move between pleasure and pain, happiness and misery, loss and gain. And we kind of swing in between all these different realms that we've heard about for the last few weeks, depending on what's kind of playing out for us karmically. So we might have pleasure and ease in the God realm because of our karmic history, but when that runs out, we're going to go whoosh down into the hell realm. So it's a bit like we are just kind of moving about, swinging around. But in the spiral order of conditionality, there's like a gradual progression between factors which progressively build on each other. So it's a bit like here, what happens is what's happened before builds on the next thing. Things build on what's happened before, and then that gets built on. So what could happen is, for instance, upon pleasure, well, it arises not pain, because we're not swinging about, but happiness. On happiness arises joy. On joy arises delight, then bliss, then rapture, then ecstasy. So who could not want that, really? And we're going to hear more about that in a talk that we're going to have in a couple of weeks' time. So these two orders of conditionality are reflected in two different states of mind, the reactive mind and the creative mind. So these are two ways that our minds can function. So we can function reactively or creatively. And if we're reacting, we're not acting at all. We're just passive, responding automatically, mechanically, you could say, to whatever stimuli are presented to us. But to function creatively means to act, to bring into existence something that wasn't there before, to be spontaneous. When we are reactive, We just keep on repeating ourselves. So we repeat the same old patterns. We do today what we did yesterday. We do this week what we did last week. We do this year what we did last year, etc. You could even say we do in this lifetime what we did in the last lifetime as well. So that's the reactive mode. But when we're creative, we can change and develop, we can become new. And so our personal growth and transformation is based on this progressive order of conditionality. And what it means is that we stop living reactively and learn to live creatively. But that isn't easy, that really isn't easy. Because it requires, amongst other things, like awareness of these two kinds of conditionality, not just as principles, but as concrete alternatives that actually confront us. You know, not once or twice in a lifetime, but just moment by moment. Because almost every minute of the day, we can choose whether we react or whether we create. So if someone speaks to us unkindly, we could react by getting angry or getting upset, or we could creatively respond. So we might creatively respond by, instead of kind of, jumping back at them because they've been unkind to us, thinking, well, I wonder what's going on for them at the moment. I wonder why they spoke to me like that. Could I actually make the situation better by responding in a kind way to them? And then that breaks this whole going round and round and round and sets up a new reality in which that person actually probably will respond really well to our kindness. And actually, it's interesting how hard I find that to do sometimes, because it just doesn't feel fair. You know what I mean? It feels like, well, I should have my, someone's been a bit mean to me, I should just be a bit mean back to them. That's what's fair. But of course, that just perpetuates the system and doesn't create anything new. And I think, I particularly think that's one of the many things that Aridas has done actually whilst in his work at the centre, is responding creatively in that way. So he'd often find himself in a situation where things maybe weren't working very well, perhaps a person wasn't being particularly kind to him, and he would respond to that creatively by maybe setting up teams in a way that worked, by not reacting to people's stuff, and in fact by being kind to them. In the last few years of his work in here, he got a bike, and he'd kind of you could see that he'd go through, something would happen, he'd get on his bike, work it all out, and come back and really open the situation up really skillfully. So I think Aridasa particularly demonstrates this creative way of being in the world. There's a lovely quote from Sangharakshita about how, which is, the creative mind loves where there is no reason to love, is happy where there is no reason for happiness, creates where there is no possibility of creativity, and in this way builds a heaven in hell's despair. So how do we do that? How do we do that? Well, let's look at the detail of that. So what we're looking at here, in terms of how to get off this wheel, is what's called the 12 Madonnas, which is this bit round the ring of the wheel. I don't know if people online can see that, but basically around the outside of the wheel, there's a ring of different images. They're the 12 Madonnas, and they're called the links of conditioned co-production. They're the experience of how we create our unhappiness in a way, and how we keep going round and round and round. And their links in a series are a chain, each one arising in dependence on the one before. But the thing to do is not get too literal about them, because in some chains there are 12 here, and sometimes there are 5, sometimes there are 10. They're getting at something. It's about getting at the spirit of what they're getting at, them getting too caught up in each image, which I think helps me, because to be honest, some of the images I'm not quite sure why you have that image. Do you know what I mean? They don't quite speak to me, but some of them do. Yes, so what happens is, traditionally, the ring on the outside covers your past life, your present life, and your future life. And it also covers, I think, how we create our everyday experience as well. And I'm not going to look at most of them, the past or the future life, but I'm going to look at a few of the pictures down the bottom, because that's where the action happens. That's where we can get off the wheel, stop the wheel, or just find a way out. So, so down the bottom, we've got these 4 things, and these are the words. So contact, which is usually a picture of a couple embracing, like here. So contact is what happens when your senses meet the object of the sense. So what that means is we have 6 senses in Buddhism. So there's the normal 5 plus the mind. And this is where, for instance, the eye meets something out there, visual image, and creates together the contact. So for instance, the eye will come in contact with a flower, and that's eye contact. The ear would come into contact with someone banging a drum, and you've got ear contact. The mind might come in contact with a memory, you've got mind contact. So that's contact. It's like we as humans, we've got certain senses, they come in contact with something that those senses have kind of been, those senses are there to, I don't know. I'm going to stop that thought because I know where I'm going with it. I know where I'm going with it. Anyway, they come into contact with the thing that they've been evolved in a way to come in contact with, if you see what I mean. Like we've evolved hearing to somehow take in the vibrations of sound in the air, for instance. So that's what's happening. And then independence on that contact arises Vedana. And probably many of you here will know that word, but if you don't, I'm going to use Vedana because it's often translated as feeling. But actually, feeling can mean several things. Feeling can mean sensations, which is what Vedana means here. But it could also, we use it to mean our emotions as well. And Vedana is not emotions. Vedana is that first experience you have, that sensation. So when you see the flower, for instance, it can be pleasant, painful, or neutral. When you hear the sound of the drum, it can be pleasant, painful, or neutral. And that is the Vedana. It is that first sensation after the contact. And it will vary from person to person and situation to situation. So in the garden out there, when my eye comes in contact with a little yellow flower, that's quite pleasant Vedana for me. I think, I just have quite a pleasant feeling. But I think for the keen person who's doing the weeding, it might be a bit of unpleasant Vedana because they see it differently, so they'll get an unpleasant Vedana. The sound of like a bass drum or bass music in the night might be quite unpleasant Vedana to me because I'm trying to sleep. But to someone who's like dancing along to its beat, it will be pleasant Vedana. So you see, like Vedana can be quite personal, whether we find it pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. So on this Vedana, on this unpleasant, pleasant, or neutral, arises craving. And also aversion. It's always called craving, but it includes aversion. And what this is our response. So if it's pleasant Vedana, our response will be, oh, give me more. It could be yummy. I want more of that. I want more of those lovely little yellow flowers. If it's unpleasant Vedana, it will be aversion. So I'll go, no, please stop playing that music in the middle of the night. I will find that really unpleasant. So, and I'll want to get rid of it. So there's like a strong pulling in towards you, stuff that gives us pleasant Vedana, and pushing away things that give us unpleasant Vedana. And there's also this neutral Vedana, which leads apparently to bewilderment and confusion, to ignorance, because you don't know what to do with it, I guess. But probably for most of us, we're not experiencing much neutral Vedana unless we're probably on a meditation retreat. It tends to be because there's so much sensations coming in, so much Vedana coming in, that it's usually the pleasant and the unpleasant that we particularly notice. So on dependence on craving arises clinging. So this is where, or attachment, or fuel it's called as well, which is really interesting. The translation of it is fuel. And this is where we want this thing. So we kind of, the picture for that is sort of picking fruit. So it's a bit like that's where we go and get that actual thing that we want. So we really move towards it and go and get it, or we push it away really strongly. And then from that is becoming, which is a pregnant woman here. So that's where something is about to be born. So basically, this is the whole process from seeing, hearing, thinking something, where we go through a process of we try and push it away or bring it towards us, and from that we kind of create a sense of ourself. It's a bit like a cycle that's going on all the time. We could be in a flow of conditions, but we sort of break that flow of conditions because we want things to be a certain different way. Yeah, so what do we do about this? Well, traditionally there's a gap here between craving, no, there's a gap here between Vedana and craving. That's the traditional in the tradition, which is where you have the Vedana and you're able not to respond with any craving. If you've done the newcomers course, I hope now you're going, but that's not what you told us on the newcomers course, because we don't teach that actually. Because actually for most of us, I think again, unless you're on a meditation retreat and really aware of what's going on, for most of us, by the time we've had the Vedana, we're into the craving or the aversion already. You know, we've done the pleasant, unpleasant, we want it, we don't want it. What we can do is we can be in the gap between craving and clinging. And I hope you're remembering this from the newcomers course, that this is the gap where we can really change our lives. We can change what we do. We can move from going round and round and round onto the spiral. This is where we can do it in one of those gaps there. So it can be really uncomfortable to be in that gap. Yeah, it can, because what we're trying to do actually is avoid discomfort, which keeps us going around the wheel. So often it's because we're experiencing discomfort that we then either push something away or we want something new. And it's interesting for me with my phone, I notice sometimes I'm on my phone and I don't even know why, and it's because I've had a really little experience of discomfort that I haven't even consciously noticed, kind of thing, and I've reached out for my little, you know, thing that makes me feel better immediately, and then I'm going, why am I on this phone? And I realized that, you know, a little bit before that I had a thought that was slightly uncomfortable, or a feeling that was slightly uncomfortable. Yes, so in order to open this door, we need to really, between craving and clinging, or between Vedana and craving, if we can do that, what we need to do is pay close attention to the way we respond to this Vedana. So we don't have choice about the Vedana our experiences give rise to, because that's the result of our past. But the choice is how we respond to those feelings. So we will have feelings that are positive, or that are pleasurable or painful, and we can choose how we respond to them. And if we carry on just semi-automatically pushing away, pulling things together, we're just going to go round the wheel. But if we face up to our discomfort, experience those feelings, and then decide to do a skillful, creative thing, we're going to open the doors and step onto the spiral path. And because that is often discomfort, that's why the first step of the spiral path is dukkha, suffering, dissatisfaction. And we'll talk more about that in a couple of weeks' time. So yes, so that's how we do it. We stay in the gap. So and we can just literally start doing that right now. There's a lovely quote from Sangharakshita again, who says, if there's a progressive response, however faint, however feeble, then at that very moment we place our foot, however hesitantly, on the first step on the path to enlightenment. So every time we can just be slightly in the gap, slightly creative, we're taking a step to enlightenment. And when we, in the newcomers course, you'll remember that we asked people to look at a kind of a habit, maybe like quite an ingrained habit, and to work on that, because that really brings us into the gap. So those moments where, if you're like, I don't know, your habit is smoking, that bit where you decide to stay with the cravings and not have another cigarette, that is being in the gap. And if you can stay with that discomfort, you will step off into the spiral and you will be creating a new self. So working with ingrained habits is one way to do it. And another way is the reaction practice. So this is described by Subhuti, who's like quite an experienced senior order member. And as he says, it's not about getting better and better at reacting. It's what it is using the fact that all of us, most of the time, most days, I think, will have many reactions. And reactions are anything that happens out there that triggers something in us. And it might trigger anger or craving or irritation or excitement at something like a craving opportunity, often to do with other people, because other people we can't control them, and they don't do what we want to do. They're very annoying. So it's often other people. And if it is other people who are triggering our reaction, what we need to do is make sure we're taking responsibility for our reaction. So it could well be that people are doing something really unskillful, and that you maybe do want to talk to them about the fact that they're maybe breaking the precepts, whatever they're doing is unskillful. But it's if we're reacting to that with a strong emotional kind of response, like our heart is beating, we're kind of like, you know, really, or it goes round and round in our head, then we've got reactivity going on. And we can use that reactivity to just really look at this process of being in the gap. So in a way, this is homework for the rest of the week, perhaps, is to, when you find yourself in a situation where you're maybe irritated by someone or you're having a lot of craving, notice what's going on with you. If you can, drop the stories, as much as possible, drop the stories and just sit with the physical experience. So the physical experience might be quite uncomfortable, but if you stay with it, it will change. So that's the thing, is when you notice a reaction, stay with it, stay with the discomfort and see what happens. That's the experiment, because that can be being in the gap. That can be where we come off, going round and round and round, and we go into the spiral. You might be able to do it at the time it's happening, or you might need to do it in meditation. So it can be quite good, like, you know, if something comes up in meditation, you kind of find yourself, I don't know, having an argument with somebody in your head again and again and again. That might be a really good time to do this practice. Okay, so let's finish there. So to sum up, we've looked at two different modes of conditionality. One is where we just we react, we keep going round and round, and the other is creative conditionality, where we we stay in the gap and allow ourselves to make a creative choice. And if we do that, that will open up freedom to us. Freedom, all sorts of freedom of mind and heart. And we'll hear more about that in a couple of weeks. Okay.